Infiltration Protocol. Part 4 of The Silent Echo. By Elton Gar. Gibbs was so happy about having gotten the device from Lawrence that Captain Solaria almost didn't have the heart to break the bad news to him. But the chief of security of the Silent Echo wasn't fragile, so she said,
"I had hoped that it was gone."
"You what?"
The security chief said.
If someone wanted the device, it wouldn't have been sitting in Lawrence's apartment. This wasn't the target of the attack on the Silent Echo, it was the payment.
Gibbs looked down at the box in his hand with a quizzical look and said,
"I think a lot more of this would make sense if I knew what this thing did."
You're right. I've been trying to protect you from this because the information is dangerous. If we're going to work this out, I need you to have all the information. But the only other thing I know they took was a computer core.
Why would they take a core? They're better than civilian computer cores, but you can just buy 2 civilian cores, and thanks to instant data transfer, they work better. And if they want information, they'd need the memory core.
It's about access. Most people never think about it, but the cores have built-in security keys. That's how they communicate, without leaving gaps in security that would let an enemy ship take over the ship's computer.
So they're stealing information that requires clearance they couldn't get without the core,
Gibbs said.
Because they didn't want one device. They want to find where they are made.
They want to mass-produce genocide devices,
Gibbs said, and Cassandra knew it was time.
Individually, they aren't all that dangerous. That's why Lawrence could sit in his apartment and use the device without hurting anyone but himself. They're sort of like a virtual reality machine that understands the brain perfectly and creates the ideal environment for it.
It's a pleasure device?
Gibbs said, a bit disappointed.
Much more than that. I'm sure it's pleasurable. But that's not the danger. When you use the machine, it creates an ideal world just for you. One without all the edges and rough patches. Every meal is perfect, every person is exactly what you want them to be. All your aches and pains are gone, and you spend every day doing exactly what you want.
Cassandra said.
What about those of us who like conflict?
What about them? The machine isn't running a program. It's reading your mind and creating what you want so fast that hundreds of years can pass in a few hours. If you want conflict, you'll get the exact type you want.
And that caused the extinction of an advanced species?
You saw Lawrence. He was willing to kill people to get access to the device. And he only spent a few hours in the device. Even having Memlink alter his memory didn't fix it. It won't kill us quickly or painfully. We'll just have fewer children. Less people will contribute to society in all the ways people are needed. That will make things worse, so more people will flee into the device.
And eventually, there is no one left.
Or perhaps there are people who resist, and eventually they rebuild society. But in that case, there is a complete collapse of the Union, and eventually, a group of people who have learned to resist happiness replace it.
So, what do we do?
What can we do? Lawrence probably didn't even know who he was working for, and they'll never let us near him again, assuming he isn't already dead. There is no way to know any of this.
This time Lawrence smiled and said,
Quantum entanglement.
It took her a few seconds to catch up with the security chief's thought. But as soon as she did, she began to type into the computer. The Silent Echo had multiple computer cores, or that was one way to think about it. But you couldn't have 8 cores each running part of the ship. So they entangled them, so they were always connected regardless of distance.
You know what this means?
Cassandra said.
That not only can we find them, but we're probably the only people who can,
Gibbs said. Getting anyone to the Silent Echo was tricky. It would only take one person sharing the location of the ship with the wrong people to get them all caught. So each person was a process that they didn't really have time for. A message was sent through covert means to go to an empty location in space. From there, They would wait until Cord was certain that they hadn't brought anyone, and then be given a second coordinate. That one would be where they met with the silent Echo.
What have you done to my ship?
Sparks said, as she walked through the airlock, her purple hair pulled back tightly and her engineering jumpsuit cleaner than normal. Her cybernetic eye glowed blue as her cybernetic implants began to connect with the ship. More than a few other parts had been replaced with cybernetics. The captain had never been able to get Sparks to confirm whether she had been in an accident or the implants were by choice.
It's good to see you too, Miriam,
the ship's AI said.
Sorry, Echo, didn't mean to insult you. But you still look like you were rebuilt with parts from a scrap heap,
Sparks said.
A Voidsmith ship. And I think we did a pretty good job of keeping it in one piece,
Captain Solaria said.
Not exactly one piece,
Echo said, reminding Cassandra that large chunks of the ship had been destroyed.
Either way, we need you to access the computer cores on the ship and download all the information from a stolen core. We've been trying, but it's not as easy as Gibbs made it sound.
It wouldn't be. I'll work on it, but finding the core would be a lot easier.
That Lieutenant Eisenberg didn't ask any questions was part of the reason that Cassandra had requested Sparks' transfer to the silent Echo. The bigger part was that she had reached the same conclusion in seconds that had taken Cassandra and Gibbs working together hours to reach. And that depth of knowledge was especially important today, because they couldn't access the Gal Web without giving away their location.
How long will that take you?
The captain asked. The only one left to pick up was the doctor, and she was willing to leave him behind.
It's on the second moon of Kepha 4,
Sparks said.
How did you?
The whole point of quantum entanglement is that it allows for instant communication at any distance. Getting the full data is difficult, pinging it isn't. How long did you expect it to take?
The captain didn't bother to answer. She knew her greatest asset as a captain was surrounding herself with people who were great at their jobs and then letting them do them. The only problem she found with it was that they kept getting promoted off the ship. And the only reason that Sparks wasn't was because, having grown up on a planet without any corporation presence, she was barely considered a citizen of the Union. Instead, she said,
Gibbs, we have a location of the core. Find out everything you can about the second moon of Kepha 4.
Once Gibbs acknowledged her, the captain said,
For now, focus the repairs on stealth and defense. There isn't going to be time to get the ship ready for a fight, so better to avoid one.
Sparks was already talking to the ship's AI. Her eye glowed as data was transferred and her robotic fingers twitched. It took her a moment, and she said,
Already on it, Captain. I can lower our footprint by 70% if you give me an hour. That should be enough to be ignored by most things.
The silent Echo was designed to be all but invisible to all active sensors. When it wasn't damaged, you had to pretty much look directly at it to know it was there, but the priority for the repair bots had been keeping oxygen inside the ship, so 70% was remarkable.
I'll check in when we know more,
the captain said, walking towards the bridge. She had barely left the bridge for weeks. Even now that there were a few other people on the silent Echo, the idea of going somewhere that she didn't have control for hours felt insane. She had only left the bridge to meet Sparks because Gibbs was there, and she trusted that he could keep the ship safe if anything happened. By the time she got there, Gibbs had an image of Kepha 4 on the screen. It was a company world. That didn't surprise Cassandra, most of them were. How else were you supposed to get enough money to colonize a world? What surprised her more, though not much more, was that it was a Memlink world. Any corporation as big as Memlink would control or even own worlds, but some controlled far more than others. Traycorp ran factories and so had dozens of worlds in red ink. Was a mining corp, so had even more. Not that anyone knew exactly how many. She doubted even the corporations did. Like every corp, Memlink had tendrils into every facet of society. But their primary focus was on memory manipulation, and that wasn't something usually done on colony worlds. Not that anything about Kepha 4 looked like a colony world. The planet itself was a gas giant. Not surprising since the core was on the moon. But the moon, while habitable, had no record of colonization. That wasn't impossible, but it wasn't easy either. You'd have to make tens of thousands of people disappear.
At least we won't have to be subtle,
Gibbs said as the captain entered, never looking away from the information that was covering the screen.
Sure. Except that we have no idea what we'll find, and the silent echo is in no condition to fight anything.
We'll take a shuttle. My point was that it's top secret, and so we don't have to worry about them telling anyone, so if we get out, we should be good. It also means they'll start shooting before they ask any questions.
The 6 members of the team were still arguing about the plan when they stepped off the shuttle onto the moon. It was habitable, but it was clear that there was a reason that it hadn't been the target for colonization. The planet was either early or late in its life cycle. The entire surface of the planet seemed to be 2 types of plant. The first was little more than moss that covered everything. The other were small ferns. That they could breathe at all was impressive, but Gibbs would have given almost anything for a tree to hide behind. The building they were approaching was the only one on the planet. That it was a 20-story tall building, as big as 2 city blocks, was hardly surprising. And since there was nothing else on the planet, it wasn't surprising that there was no security outside of the building. They didn't even seem to have cameras or a fence. It was as if the building had been dropped here and forgotten. The lack of cameras told Gibbs a lot more than just how safe it was to walk around the building, because if they hadn't done the most basic things for security, then he could safely assume they hadn't done the more complex and expensive things.
This way,
Sparks said, and they began to circle the building. Sparks wouldn't have been on the team if there was anyone else who could pinpoint the computer core, but that didn't mean she wasn't useful. Having the captain was a bit of a problem too. She was a good soldier, and he had no questions of her abilities in a fight. Killing a voidsmith was proof of that. But having someone indispensable on the team was a liability. But he didn't have anyone else. The other 3 members of the team were security officers. They weren't the best, but they were the most loyal people he knew, and that made up for a lot. He had planned a quick and messy entrance, but that was when he had assumed they had already been seen and speed mattered. So instead he pulled out a small tube with a sharp point at one end. It could be used for a lot of things, from a weapon to a way to start fires, but today he drove the point into the glass. He expected it to break into thousands of small cubes of glass. But he should have known better. Safety glass would have cost a few cents extra per window, and that wasn't the way corporations did things. That meant he had to hit the glass several more times to break it and then work out the shards, but with time and the correct tool he got in. Once the glass was cleared, he pulled Sparks up so she could make it into the building, and she connected to one of the computer terminals while the others got in.
this security system is so bad that it makes me wonder if it's a trap. You could make it considerably more secure with a few software fixes.
Let's not do that until we're ready to leave,
The captain said.
I could probably take most of it over.
Sparks said.
No. If you can access the data, then do it. Otherwise, I want to stay as silent as possible until we get to the core.
Gibbs said. Technically, the captain was in charge, but she was too smart to not let Gibbs run a security operation.
You're right. It's just that you know how I feel about sloppy work.
Gibbs didn't bother to point out that for most people, writing code wasn't limited by the speed the computer could take in data, and almost no one had a quantum computer attached to their brain. Instead, he pointed at the two guards who would guard Sparks and then where they should position themselves. The third moved in beside the captain. Her entire job on the mission was to make certain that Cassandra got out. The three of them stepped out of the room and began to move quickly, Gibbs leading the way. Captain Solaria and Ensign Harper followed closely. The sterile, silent corridors of the building seemed to stretch endlessly before them, with occasional flickering overhead lights adding an eerie quality to their surroundings. The low hum of an approaching security drone reached their ears, prompting the team to halt and press against the walls to avoid detection. The drone floated past, its sensors focused on routine surveillance, unaware of their presence. Once the drone passed, Gibbs signaled for them to continue, quickening their pace. The tension in the air was palpable as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the building. The occasional encounter with patrolling guards forced them to use stealth and precision, but there were remarkably few people. As they approached the designated room housing the stolen computer core, they encountered a pair of armed guards standing watch outside. Captain Solaria held up her hand, silently signaling for Gibbs and Ensign Harper to stay back. She stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative.
Stand down. We're here to retrieve what rightfully belongs to us.
The guards exchanged a glance but remained vigilant. Without warning, one of them reached for his sidearm. In a swift, practiced motion, Captain Solaria drew her gun. Gibbs had taught her that trick. If you looked good enough drawing the gun, everyone assumed you would also be good at shooting it. The guards hesitated, their resolve visibly shaken by the unexpected display of weaponry. In that moment of uncertainty, Gibbs seized the opportunity. He lunged forward, disarming the second guard with a well-placed kick, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Ensign Harper swiftly recovered the fallen weapon and secured it. At the same time, the second man reached for his radio. Both Captain Solaria and Harper moved forward, ensuring no reinforcements could disrupt the confrontation. The guard was stronger than both of them, but the captain was well-trained and had help, so she disarmed the remaining guard. Once both were down, she said,
The computer core in this room was stolen from an ambushed military ship. Remind the Memlink board how much it's going to cost them to explain how it got here.
Gibbs used zip-tie cuffs to secure the guards. It would only give them a couple of extra minutes at best, but avoiding killing people wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good tactics. Companies might not care if you killed their employees, but they generally avoided being the ones to escalate a situation. The room that held the core had a heavily secured door, but the code controlling it was about as secure as wet paper towels to sparks, and it opened as they approached the room to reveal a dimly lit chamber housing the stolen computer core. However, their moment of triumph was short-lived. The room's proximity alarms activated, and a robotic voice echoed through the chamber.
Unauthorized access detected. Security protocol initiated.
Red lights flashed, and a reinforced door at the far end of the room slammed shut and sealed. A metallic grinding sound reverberated as heavy security shutters descended, sealing them inside. Gibbs attached the device Sparks had given him to the core and spoke into his radio.
The device is active. But we don't have much time before security reinforcements arrive.
It's a lot of data. How long can you give me?
Cassandra said.
I don't know, but if we can't get out, I expect you to get that data to the Silent Echo and do everything possible to stop Memlink from whatever they're planning. There is an access code in my desk.
Gibbs had known the captain had a backup plan. He didn't know it was them just going on without her. Sparks said,
Captain, I'm sorry, but I've had access to all the secure information on the Echo since about a week after I boarded her. I never feel safe if I don't. But I assure you, I haven't read it.
For most people, the captain might not have believed them, but Sparks wouldn't have lied if she had read the data. Not because she was above lying, but because she was so fervent in the belief that data should be free that it wouldn't seem wrong. Then there was a familiar hum, and Gibbs understood. It explained everything about this place. The lack of doors and cameras on the outside, the single building, even the glass windows. This wasn't a building, this was a spaceship. He only had time to speak to Sparks on the radio, and said,
You need to get to a room that doesn't have a compromised window.
I'm on it.
Sparks said, not questioning Gibbs. Then seconds later the lights dimmed, the building shook, and he felt his stomach drop with the familiar feel of a jump drive being activated.
Author's note. Well, I hope that was a surprise for everyone. I'm planning 2 more episodes in the first season of The Silent Echo. And they should be fun, as I've gotten the main cast for this season to where they need to be. I know that 6 episodes is short for a season, but as everyone knows, the first season is often short so that you can test the waters. but there should be plenty left to explore in this world, and plenty of villains. If you enjoyed it, please consider becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/Elton, and if you can't do that, you can certainly sign up for my free newsletter at www.ansci-fi.com. Thank you. Elton Gar.